Going to be doing a quick video on how to change the oil on a 2005 Ford Ranger in this case. Changing the oil is going to be pretty similar on any vehicle, but if you want to see how to do it on a Ranger specifically or just get an idea for any car, this will be a good video to watch. So a few things you're going to need. First is the oil itself. In this case we're using a synthetic blend and we're using 5W30 because that's what the truck calls for the 4.0 engine that's in it. You're also going to need an oil filter. In this case it's a Motorcraft, which is the Ford brand. FL820S is the part number for the Motorcraft. And one thing to mention is some of the newer cars do require a full synthetic oil. I haven't gone to synthetic in my truck, but if your car requires a full synthetic oil, make sure you use that, or if you just want the extra protection of a full synthetic, make sure you use that. You're also going to need a ratchet with a socket for your drain plug. In my case it's a 13 millimeter. One thing to note is I have this wrench too, and you can use a box end wrench, that's fine, but if you look at it, this is a 12-point wrench and the socket is 6-point, meaning how many points are inside the socket. You want to use a 6-point socket or wrench on your drain plug because a 12-point is a lot more likely to strip it out. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, is make sure you use a 6-point wrench. So we're going to be using the socket today. You might need an oil filter wrench and your owner's manual, and your owner's manual is going to tell you how much oil you need. It's going to tell you what kind of oil, and it's going to tell you how often you should change your oil. Also, another good thing is safety glasses, and if you want to, a pair of gloves. Also, some old rags just to help clean up some of the excess oil. And then on the floor down here we have a jack and a single jack stand, but anytime you use a jack to jack up your car, make sure you use a jack stand or jack stands if you jack up both sides of your car. Some cars you only need to jack up one side to get enough access, in which case just make sure you support it with a jack stand. And that's another thing your owner's manual will tell you, is where the jacking points are, so you know the safe spot to jack up your car. Also have an oil drain pan and a funnel. One thing to note on my truck here is I do have it jacked up just slightly on the passenger side because that's the side I'm going to be accessing everything from. If I was just doing this on a normal basis, I would not jack the truck up. I'm 6 feet tall and like 220 pounds, and I can fit under the truck fine. The only reason I jacked it up today is just to have some extra room under there for video purposes. So you get under the hood, open your hood, and your two things to note for the oil change are going to be your dipstick, which is right here, and I'm going to pull that up just slightly. That's going to allow air to get into the engine, and then your fill tube right here. And on mine the whole neck always wants to untwist instead of just the fill cap, but I'll take that off camera. You want to take that off and just set it back in there, and that's going to allow more oxygen to get into the engine to let the old oil drain out. Okay, so I'm underneath the truck now. I'm behind the front tire on the passenger side. You can see this is a 4-wheel drive truck. There's the front differential, and the drain plug for the oil is right here. I have my drain pan underneath. I apologize, this isn't the best lighting. Just trying to give you the best view of everything. So basically you're just going to take your socket with a ratchet on it, or ratchet with a socket on it rather, And make sure it's on there good. Make sure you have the right size socket and start twisting it off. Sometimes it'll take a fair amount of torque to break them loose, but then they should be pretty easy to take out by hand once you get the torque broke loose on them. And one thing to note is make sure that as you're unscrewing this drain plug, make sure you're pushing in towards the drain pan, and that's going to prevent the oil plug from falling into the oil pan or your drain pan when the plug comes loose. So right now I just felt it got the last thread loose, and just pull it away and your oil will fall out just like that. So this time just kind of let it drain, clean your hands off and stuff, and let it drain for a few minutes and we'll come back. Okay, so our oil's pretty much down to a trickle right now, and we're gonna go ahead and take the old oil filter off. You can see the drain plug right there, and the oil filter is just above it, more towards the passenger side of the truck. So basically you take your oil filter wrench and just get it around the bottom of the filter, and the more you twist these wrenches, the tighter they get. My hand's in the way there, but you basically just need to break it loose with the wrench, and then you can get your hand up there. And I should have gotten it a little bit looser with the wrench. If I was right underneath it, I could probably twist it off, but it's kind of awkward with the camera in here. So anyways, just give it a couple more turns with the wrench. And there goes my light into the oil. That's cool. Oh well. So anyways, just keep turning it out, and there it got loose. And then once it gets loose, you can pretty much just let it go by hand, or it'll spin pretty easily by hand. And you can see the seal came loose on it, so just let it sit there and drain for a little bit. And then once it drains, just twist it off. And this is going to be somewhat heavy. There's probably half a quart or so of oil in there, so just make sure you're prepared for some weight when it drops. Okay, so our oil is slowed down to a pretty slow drip there, so we're just going to go ahead and put our drain plug back in. Make sure you clean the drain plug with a clean towel before you reinstall it, just to get any debris off of there. So you're going to want to start it by hand and get it in as far as you can by hand, and that's just going to ensure that you don't cross thread it or anything. And then take your ratchet and just snug it up. It doesn't have to be super tight. If you are worried about it, you can always use a torque wrench. I never do. I just snug them up, and I've never had a problem. Okay, so now we have our new oil filter here, and one thing we want to do before we install it is put some oil on this rubber gasket. So just get some oil on your finger. I always use new oil. Some people use old oil. It really doesn't matter too much. We're just making sure that this gasket seals, and just rub it around that ring. And another thing to keep in mind is that make sure that this ring on the old filter, make sure you check your old filter that you took off and make sure that that ring is still on there and that it didn't stick to the engine block. If it did stick to the engine block, just get a pick, or you can usually just take them off with your fingers and just pop it off. But if it sticks to the engine block and you put this one on over it, you'll have a major leak. Okay, so now we got our drain plug snugged up. And by the way, the torque, the foot-pounds of torque on a drain plug is usually around 20 pounds. But you can look it up on Google for your particular car if you want to use a torque wrench. Anyways, looking back up at the filter housing, I went ahead and cleaned it off with this light is really giving us trouble. I went ahead and cleaned off the filter housing just with a clean towel. And you're going to put your new filter up there and just start spinning it on. And it should, once it catches like that, it should spin extremely freely at first. And you should get 5 turns out of it or so before it makes contact with the block. And you can just hand tighten these. You don't need to use the wrench to tighten them. I use a rag just for a little extra grip, but that's all you need to do is just hand tighten them, and they'll be a lot easier to get off next time. And last thing you want to do while you're under here is just take your rag and just clean up any drips that came from draining the oil or that came off the oil filter. Because that's going to help you identify any leaks once we put the new oil in and actually start the engine. Okay, so now once you're double sure and have double checked that your filter and drain plug are tight underneath the vehicle, we can come back up to the top. Our oil drain, or excuse me, oil fill port is right there. I just placed a funnel inside of it to make it a little bit easier. And you're just going to start filling it up. Again, you can find in your owner's manual how much your particular vehicle takes. Mine takes 5 quarts, and I've changed the oil on this truck probably about a dozen times or so since I've owned it. And I've always just dumped in the full 5-quart jug, and it fills it right up to the full mark. If you're not sure, it's always better to start with a little bit less than what the capacity is, because it's a lot easier to add oil in than it is to take it out. And the nice thing about these 5-quart jugs is, at least if your vehicle will take the full 5 quarts, is you can dump your old oil back into them and then take it to like Walmart or O'Reilly's, AutoZone, or anything like that, and they'll recycle the oil for you for free. I just make sure to get everything in there. And then once you're done filling, just take your funnel out of there, put your fill cap back in. Okay, so we got our fill cap back in. We're just going to push our dipstick back in that we loosened up earlier. We're going to go inside the truck and start it. And check your dash. Make sure that there's no oil lights coming on. And just let it run for a little bit. Don't rev it or anything, just let it idle. Now we can shut it off. And we'll go back and we will get our flashlight wherever that went. Well, I'll do it off video. Anyways, you just want to get your flashlight and go underneath the truck and look and make sure that there's no oil coming out of anywhere that you touched, being the drain plug or the filter. Making sure there's no leaks. And then last thing we're going to want to do is check the oil. So let me get the camera on the tripod. And okay, so last thing that we need to do is check the level of the oil. So just get a clean rag again, pull your dipstick out, wipe it, and put your dipstick back in and check it. It's hard to see on there, but it is right up to the full mark. There's a hash mark that's like right there on a dipstick, and it's right up to the top of that. If it's low, you have basically 2 holes on the dipstick, and from the bottom hole to the top hole is 1 quart. So just if it's low, just add in like a half a quart at a time and just keep checking it until you get to the full mark. But in my case it's full, so we can clean up our tools and let the truck down off the jacks, and we should be good to go for another 3,000 miles or so. Thanks for watching.